Beyond the battlefield, the internal power struggles shaping the Middle East. Welcome to The Real Shift. I'm your host, Ro, and once again, just roll with me. When we look at the maps of the Middle East today, we see arrows pointing towards escalation. We see missile trajectories, naval blockades in the Bab el-Mandeb, and troop movements across borders. But to truly understand why this region is on the precipice of a wider war, we have to look away from the front lines and into the corridors of power in Jerusalem and Tehran. There is a common saying in geopolitics that all foreign policy is local. Today, that has never been more true. While the world watches the military maneuvers, the real drivers of this conflict are often found in the internal political survival of the leaders involved.
The group of movements and countries that have been involved in the so-called axis of resistance, which pushes back against Israeli hegemony and American militarism, that group of actors is still effective. They may not dominate the region, but they're strong enough to do what they've just done. We've seen now in the last 6 weeks, Iran and Hezbollah almost single-handedly checking, not defeating, but checking the two biggest military powers in the region, which is the US and Israel. They forced them into two ceasefires, one in Iran and now one in Lebanon. Now, this is not a finished story. This is still going on. These might collapse and the war may resume. But the fact that the US and Israel have been forced to enter these ceasefires, I think, is a sign of the evolving balance of power across the region. And you're going to see this reflected, for instance, in many Arab countries who are, especially in the energy-producing Gulf region, who are going to recalibrate their relations. They'll still be very close friends with the U.S., buy a lot of weapons and buy a lot of tech stuff, but they're also going to recalibrate to have more meaningful ties with Iran, with Turkey, with China, with Russia and other people like that. So we're seeing a slow motion evolution of the entire balance of power in the region, with the background being that the overwhelming majority of people in the Arab region and Islamic Turkey and Iran, about 750 million people, the overwhelming majority of them see Israel and the U.S. as their main security threat. So something historic is going on here in slow motion.
Today, we are going to go beyond the battlefield. We are going to examine how domestic pressures, legal battles, and the fragile grip on power are dictating the life and death decisions of millions. Let's start with Israel. To understand Israel's current strategic posture, you have to understand the unique position of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Many of you in the comments have pointed out a crucial question. Is this a war for national security or a war for political survival? It's no secret that before October 7th, Israel was a nation deeply divided. For months, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were in the streets protesting a controversial judicial reform. The country was at a breaking point. Then, the tragedy of October 7th occurred, and the nation unified in grief and resolve. But for Netanyahu, the clock is ticking. He is currently facing long-standing corruption trials. Under normal circumstances, A failure of the magnitude of October 7th would lead to an immediate commission of inquiry and likely the collapse of the government. However, as long as a state of emergency exists, as long as the war continues, the pressure for fresh elections and progression of his legal battles are effectively deferred. But it hasn't just but it isn't just about the prime minister's legal standing. It is about the coalition. Netanyahu leads the most right-wing government in Israel's history. His partners, figures like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, had the keys to his office, holds the keys to his office. Their internal red lines are clear. They demand total victory and are openly resistant to any ceasefire that includes significant concessions. If Netanyahu moves towards a diplomatic solution that his right-wing flank deems too soft, the coalition collapses. If the coalition collapses, Netanyahu faces the voters and the courts. Without the shield of the premiership, this creates a powerful domestic incentive for perpetual war. The strategic goal of total victory serves a vital domestic function. It keeps the current government intact. Now let's turn our gaze to Tehran. The Islamic Republic is facing its own set of internal existential threats, and its actions on the regional stage are a direct reflection of that domestic fragility. From the Iranian leadership, the primary goal is not the destruction of Israel or the expulsion of the U.S. Those are ideological pillars, yes, but the primary goal is the survival of the regime itself. The woman life freedom protests that swept the country recently revealed a profound rift between the aging clerical establishment and the young disillusioned population. The Iranian economy is stifled by sanctions and mismanagement. Inflation is rampant. In this environment, the regime needs a forward defense strategy. By funding and directing the axis of resistance from the Houthis in Yemen to Hezbollah in Lebanon, Tehran keeps its enemies busy far from its own borders. However, there is a dangerous irony here. While the regime uses regional escalation to project strength, it is terrified of a direct full-scale war with Israel or the United States. Why? Because a direct war could be the catalyst for a very internal collapse they fear. The Iranian leadership knows that their military hardware is aging and that their domestic population might not rally behind the flag if they believe the regime dragged them into a ruinous conflict for the sake of proxy interests. This is why we see Iran's calibrated responses. They want to do enough to maintain their revolutionary credentials, but not so much that they invite a strike that could destabilize the regime at home. This brings us to the escalation ladder. When we see the Houthis attacking shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb, it isn't just a military tactic. For Iran, it is a way to show its domestic hardliners and regional partners that it can still hurt the West without risking a direct strike on Tehran. But here is where the internal pressure of both sides collide. In Israel, the domestic pressure to finish the job against Hezbollah in the north is growing. Thousands of Israelis remain displaced from their home near the Lebanese border. For the Israeli public, this is an intolerable loss of sovereignty. Netanyahu knows that if he cannot return those citizens to their homes, his political brand as Mr. Security is dead. Therefore, the internal pressure in Israel is pushing the government towards a confrontation with Hezbollah, a move that would almost certainly force Iran's hand. We are witnessing a dangerous feedback loop. Netanyahu needs the war to continue to hold his coalition together and stay out of court. Iranian leaders need to project regional powers to justify its domestic grip, yet it cannot afford the consequences of the very war it is flirting with. When you see a headline about a new drone strike or a failed ceasefire negotiation, ask yourself, why does this benefit at home? Who does this benefit at home? If a ceasefire is reached, Netanyahu's government likely falls within weeks. If Iran looks weak, the hardliners in the Revolutionary Guard may begin to question the supreme leader's path. In both cases, the personal survival of the leaders is inextricably linked to the continuation of the conflict. So where does this leave the region? We are in a cycle where de-escalation is political. So where does this leave the region? We are in a cycle where de-escalation is a political risk for the decision makers. The internal red lines are becoming more rigid than the military ones. In Israel, the pressure from the families of hostages is the only domestic force currently powerful enough to rival the right-wing coalition's demands in Iran. In Iran, the fear of collapsing economy and the risks. In Iran, the fear of a collapsing economy and a restive public is the only thing keeping the regime from going all in. The tragedy of the current Middle East is that the path of peace is blocked by the political self-interest of those in charge. The battlefield is where the blood is spilled, but the war is being fueled by the need to stay in power. As we continue to monitor the movements in the Red Sea and the strikes across the Levant, we must keep our eyes on the polling numbers in Tel Aviv and the wishes and the whispers in the corridors of Tehran. The map tells us where the war is happening, but the internal politics tells us why it won't stop. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive. This is The Real Shift. I'm Ro. Your comments and questions are on our previous videos help shape this analysis. Let's keep the conversation going below. What do you think is the point of no return for these leaders? Once again, I'm Ro, and this is The Real Shift. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.